Heavy rain pours down outside, but inside the health clinic, the air is thick with its own kind of storm. Rafael surveys the tiny room, the peeling walls, his eyes wearing that look of someone who's already given up caring. But Julia, even though she's exhausted and the dark circles beneath her eyes run deep, refuses to bow her head. She grips a patient's arm tight as she argues with the new doctor. Around here, we save lives using what we have, doctor, not what we wish we had. If you're not going to help, at least don't get in the way. The silence hangs heavy. Just a second, but it's enough to see in both their eyes the fear, the anger, and a raw strength that almost no one understands. Will she break down the wall Rafael built around his own heart? And what is that doctor hiding, the one who scorns everything except his own pain? When the emergency alarm sounds and a new crisis erupts, they're forced to choose, fight together, or let pride win once again. Yet, in the middle of all that tension, no one guesses that here, amid the chaos, the impossible might happen. And this is just the beginning. Will love be able to overcome so many scars? Hit play and see how this story will change everything. The moment Rafael stepped through the health clinic gate, it felt as if the very air grew heavier. Out on the dirt road, a fine rain was falling, turning the ground into thick, red mud that clung to his shoes that were surely worth more than anything inside. He brushed past the timid good morning greetings, hugging his black briefcase to his chest, face unreadable, the kind of expression that dares anyone to guess what he's really thinking. Inside, the scent of disinfectant mixed with stale coffee was strong. The walls were no longer white, but a weary beige, stained in the corners by water damage. Patients sat on plastic chairs, watching closely. Somewhere, a child whimpered quietly, a woman sneezed, coughs echoed in the air. Rafael took it all in, and his contempt was obvious, like everything here was beneath him. You could see him looking for something to criticize. Watching from the reception desk, Julia stayed silent. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, dressed all in white, with a pin clipped to her collar and hands pressing down on paperwork. Her gaze was steady, the kind that never shies away from a storm. She'd heard rumors. The new doctor sent here was supposedly a big deal. But seeing his cold face, the almost arrogant way he walked, it was impossible not to feel the sting of anger. An odd hush fell when he strode down the hallway. Even the nurses, who tried to whisper, cut off mid-sentence. The tap of his shoes echoed. Rafael eyed the outdated equipment with disdain, running his finger along a monitor as if it would dirty his hand. He even grimaced. They faced each other for the first time by the wound care room. It should have been ordinary, just a new doctor arriving. But the way he sized Julia up and down, as if silently asking, is this really the best they have? Hurt worse than if he'd said it out loud. She gripped her clipboard harder than she needed and gave a lopsided smile, not friendly, more like a challenge. Welcome, doctor. Nothing shines here, but we do everything we can to make sure no one dies waiting, she said, looking straight into his eyes. Rafael replied almost without moving his face. I imagine your idea of everything possible is rather flexible around here. The hallway seemed to shrink. Julia's colleagues froze, one even holding her breath. Julia wanted to scream, but bit her lip. Nobody here could afford to look small. He kept his guard up, untouchable, but if you looked closer, you'd see there was a deep well behind those hard eyes. He straightened his brand-new coat, took a slow breath, kept scanning every detail, the rusty gurney, the nearly empty glove box, patient files piled high. I'll need full reports on the last serious cases. I'd also like to review the files from the recent outbreak. If you can provide them, if they're even all documented, he said flatly. She shot back instantly, steady. We might not have a laser printer, doctor, but we never run out of dedication here. Her tone was sweet, but it cut deep. Inside, Julia's stomach was in knots. She feared people like him, ice-cold and perfect. But even more, she feared those who didn't respect what she did. The sweat of every night here, the lives shouted back to safety, with no anesthesia, no luxuries. She thought of the patients who'd leaned on her, of mothers who cried thankful after night shifts. If he wants to play hardball, he'll trip all by himself, she thought. Deep down, Rafael heard her, but not everything went in. He taught himself not to feel, to keep work and life separate. Every dilapidated corner reminded him of what he ran from: chaos, uncertainty, fear. For a split second, he faltered. He caught Julia's gaze and saw in it a strength both raw and warm, almost wished he could belong there, but then shut himself off again. The clock on the wall ticked out the tension. The only sound now was the slow whir of the fan, not nearly strong enough to beat back the sticky heat. The rain outside got heavier, and a gust of wind slammed the front door. Rafael flinched so slightly almost no one noticed, but Julia did, and it gave her a brief spark of hope. He's not made of stone, she thought. They stayed there, unmoving. Julia with her clipboard pinned to her side, Rafael fiddling with his collar as if wanting to keep even the air at arm's length. For a moment, time stopped. No right words, no calming gesture. Just that invisible line between worlds so different, and neither willing to back down. The nurses whispered in the background, one trying to hide her nerves with a silly smile. Julia took a deep breath, inhaling the sharp scent of alcohol and the bitterness of anger. She knew. This was just the start. Rafael brushed past her into the break room. No one could tell if he ignored her on purpose or just couldn't see anyone else but himself. She stood there, watching him disappear, thinking about all the battles still ahead of them. She'd never feared a fight, but that man's coldness was another language, hard to understand, harder still to break through. Outside, the storm picked up. Inside the clinic, you could almost cut the tension. The future was still just a threat, but there, in the silence, in their glances, their story had already begun. No grand gestures, no apologies. Just the strange certainty that after this, neither of them would ever be quite the same. You know that feeling when a room is full of people, but it's like only two stubborn hearts fit in all that space? That's pretty much how it was in that forgotten clinic, early on a Monday morning. The hum of the fan was already enough to get on your nerves, but nothing compared to the way Rafael scrutinized every detail. He stood nearly arms crossed, eyeing the cabinets as if he was searching for dirt just to be right. The kind of person who doesn't need to raise his voice to make you feel small, his silence alone was a rebuke. He barely arrived and was already pointing out missing supplies, expired prescriptions, a poorly painted wall. He spoke softly, but his tone was harsh. He wasn't asking, he was judging. Julia tried to keep her cool, but every sentence from him landed like it erased years of work, sleepless nights, all those times she'd hustled to round up extra gauze or pulled a double because someone else couldn't take it. It hurt right where her pride lived. She pretended to jot notes on a pad, just so she didn't have to meet his icy eyes, the ones that said nothing and, at the same time, said she was always wrong. Her team felt everything. Old Alvaro kept shuffling folders, trying to look busy, but you could tell from afar how he flinched every time Rafael came near. Camila, still just a trainee, not her nails. Even the patients in the hallway, waiting for their appointments, looked uneasy with the weird atmosphere. The silence between one consult and the next was brutal. Everyone pretended things were fine, but just a glance at how they avoided each other was enough to taste the tension. That kind of quiet fight that hurts more than screaming. At one point, Julia had to request a routine test, nothing major, but Rafael cut in bluntly. Don't you have proper protocols here? How do you people work like this? She took a deep breath, holding back what she really felt. She fiddled with her coat, tucked a stray lock behind her ear, and replied with a faint, not quite real smile. We do what we can, doctor. Around here, the best we have is what we pull together on the day. He let out a heavy sigh. She realized just how much she wanted to scream. To say nobody here was any less. That every life saved was a victory, not a fluke. But her pride was as big as his. Instead of blowing up, she turned away, rummaging through drawers, just so she wouldn't have to face his judgment. The rest of the day went on like this. Between patients, he pointed out the lack of gloves, missing meds. He even said, loud enough for all to hear, in a real hospital, this doesn't happen. She heard him, stopped for a second in the hall, her hands trembling, her eyes clouding, but she didn't cry. She knew she couldn't. Her team was there. They looked at her, like they needed her strong so they could go on. Julia ran her tongue over her lips, straightened her shoulders, and kept going. Sometimes Rafael would stand by the door, alone, staring out at the cloudy sky threatening more rain. The breeze brought in the smell of wet earth, but inside it was just cold. Maybe he felt it. Now and then he checked his watch, impatient. Maybe thinking about what he'd lost in life, the things he couldn't control. But he never let anything show, just that coldness. Not a smile, not a sigh of relief, nothing. Later, a boy with a swollen foot came in for a dressing change. Julia, always patient, started explaining what she was doing, but Rafael interrupted, snatching the kit from her hands. Let me do it, he said, already starting, without asking, never looking the boy in the eye. The child bit his lip, eyes seeking comfort from Julia. In that moment, she felt every scrap of kindness she tried to infuse here being stolen away. She envied people who could work without caring. She was angry, too. Angry at being overrun like this, angry at his pride needing to be better. But she stood there, swallowing it all. When the boy left, she thought about saying something, but choked it down. Just called for the next patient, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a scene. Later, while it poured outside, Julia straightened paperwork in the break room. She ached for a hug, for someone to say, "It'll be okay, you make a difference here." She wished she could quit, just for 5 minutes. Then she heard a noise in the corridor. Rafael was passing by, silent, alone as she felt inside. They stood face to face for a few long seconds. She breathed in, clutching her papers. He just looked, serious, face blank. No anger, no warmth. Just that distance. Deep down, Julia wanted to ask if he had any idea how hard this was. If he knew the cost of never giving up. But the silence spoke for both of them. She understood. Their pride was a wall so high, neither would climb it any time soon. The rest of their shift dragged on. Each kept working, neither yielding an inch. Whenever a patient improved, Julia smiled without showing teeth. Rafael just scribbled in his notes an obligation. In her mind, the whole day felt like an invisible fight to prove she belonged. The weather, the rain, the cold hospital, everything seemed to say, maybe it's not enough. But still, she knew she'd come back tomorrow. And maybe he would too. Even if neither would admit it, thank the other, or apologize. Because pride hurts deeply, but giving way hurts even more, when your world is all you have. Sometimes a shift feels like a slow-motion movie, all gray and monotonous except for the clock changing numbers and a cough from across the room. That day, it was nothing like that. The crash at the door exploded in the stuffy afternoon, the sky outside heavy with rain. A man burst in carrying a small girl, face white with terror, and no one moved at first. Somehow, time froze. For just a few seconds, everyone stared, Julia rooted to the floor, her heart already dreading what was coming. The father cried out, frantic, "She's not breathing right. For God's sake, please save my daughter." That skinny little girl in her father's arms, sweat-plastered hair, sticky skin, chest heaving quick and shallow, it was like fear made flesh. Julia rushed forward, her authoritative voice kicking in before her mind caught up. "Treatment room? Now. Prepare oxygen." The terrified father's gaze locked to her, holding tight. Rafael stood still for a moment, just observing. You could almost hear his thoughts. Here? Without a full team? No resources. But there was no time to waste. In the cramped room, smelling of old alcohol and damp, Rafael took charge at the head of the gurney. His trademark serious, closed-off face seemed even colder up close. The girl was wheezing, pupils wide. He was brisk, to the point. How long has she been like this? Anybody got adrenaline ready? No. But nobody answered. Everyone just looked at each other. This wasn't a big hospital, nothing came easy. Improvising was the only way. Julia caught the look on Rafael's face and could feel it in his hands, which shook just a bit. He was frustrated. He had been caught off guard, out of control, and that was a fear no one here admitted. "We need to intubate." "Are you all ready for this?" he asked softly, but that sharp incredulity in his tone stung. Julia took a deep breath. "We don't have the ideal kit, but she needs oxygen, now." She snatched up an old mask, jerry-rigged it with tape and a makeshift catheter while Rafael muttered under his breath, sweat beading on his brow. The staff's eyes bounced between them, as if weighing who to trust. You could hear the little girl's cough and, in the background, thunder announcing the downpour outside. In the room, there was only their breathing and an anxious hush, the silence of people feeling scared, proud, and ashamed all at once. Rafael hesitated. He glanced at the broken blood pressure machine, at the malfunctioning pulse ox, the dwindling meds. You could read on his face, "This is impossible. We're just delaying the inevitable. It will all go wrong." But Julia didn't have that luxury. "Rafael, hold her airway." His name came out blunt. She didn't even notice she'd used it. She just wanted to save the girl. "Trust me. Hold on." An assistant started crying softly in the background. Rain hammered down, darkening the window. The world outside vanished. There was just that stifling room. Two people who could barely stand each other fighting for one tiny set of lungs. Rafael took the child's hands. They were cold, limp. On impulse, Julia grabbed his wrist firmly, as if to say, "Go." Their eyes met briefly at his, critical, afraid, trying to hide that fear, hers, resolute, tired, but solid. Her look said, "I've done this 1,000 times before. It's going to work." He teetered between wanting to pull away and wanting to hold on forever. There was a moment when everything went silent again. Only the rainfall, the rustle of tape, exchanged looks. Julia adjusted the oxygen flow, gave an order quietly but full of faith. "Breathe, little one. Please." And the girl coughed hard, gasped, and slowly came back. Julia felt her knees wanting to give way. Rafael squinted, like he was holding back an ancient sob. No one celebrated. No applause. Just everyone breathing together, an odd silence full of things unsaid. The assistant wiped her face. The father hugged his daughter, sobbing. Rafael leaned against the wall for a second, rubbing the back of his neck, eyes down. Julia wiped the girl's forehead gently and breathed a quiet sigh of relief, not letting show how much she'd shaken inside. The silence between her and Rafael grew heavy. It wasn't hostile, but it seemed to say, "I saw who you really are." He tried to say something, bit his lip, tugged at his coat, but nothing came. Just stood there, staring at Julia differently. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't gratitude, but somehow, in that look, both were there. The others drifted out, still in shock. The two of them stayed a few seconds longer, breathing deep. The sound of rain outside softened. A gust of wind rattled a scrap of paper on the floor. Even in the thick of exhaustion and tension, Julia noticed, his eyes weren't quite so cold anymore. Now there was a grain of respect, an undercurrent of guarded admiration mixed with guilt. She nodded back, silent, just a hint, an unspoken truce between people who nearly lost themselves, but chose to keep trying. Deep down in that silence, Julia realized, and maybe he did too, after that battle, they weren't complete strangers any longer. And though no one would say it out loud, something in that cramped room had changed forever. Night in the clinic is different. It grinds you down. Out there, the whole city falls silent. A stray dog barks somewhere, far off. In here, time drips by slow. Cold lights, colors washed out. Fatigue is a heavy shadow on everyone's face. But no one dares speak of it, admitting it would be letting your body collapse. By the start of the early morning, there's a particular emptiness. Monitors light up, beeping lazy and slow, reminding you the patient's hearts are still beating, even when it feels like your own might give up. Julia moves between beds, footsteps soft. It's not that she's not tired. It's something else, like she refuses to let the weight settle. She tucks a blanket around the old man in the first bed, smooths the hair of a young woman with cramps, checks a nearly empty floor with quick efficiency, as if to say, "I won't let anything happen to you." Rafael leans near the doorway, arms crossed, deep-set eyes. Anyone glancing over might think he feels nothing, just waiting to clock out. But Julia notices something else, even if she can't name it. When she passes by, her chest goes tight. It isn't anger anymore. That's past. Now it's just an awkwardness. It's not something you can figure out. He keeps track of everything, discreet. Now and then, straightens his coat as if to shield himself from the cold. But I know, and maybe Julia feels it too, the chill isn't just from the room. It's from him. Or rather, it's his way of making it through. After 2, by the clock. Julia yawns and stretches before sitting. Just 5 minutes, she tells herself. The metal bench presses against the backs of her legs. She rubs her eyes, tries to blink the sleep away, and finds her gaze landing on Rafael, who, by chance, is looking right at her. For one long second, neither looks away. His gaze is a wall. But a transparent wall, you can see cracks if you look close. No one speaks. It's just their eyes trying to say something, but neither could explain what. He wonders if she sees the emptiness. If she realizes everything he's learned to bury just to keep going. She, on the other hand, feels a silly shiver. She wants to ask if he's okay, but pride wins out. She doesn't want to be the savior. In moments like these, every silence is loaded with questions. Tiny noises become huge. Her chair squeaking. The ventilator in the background. A patient coughs and both look at the same time, like soldiers on a battlefield ready to move. But it's nothing. Silence falls again. The shift drags on. Watery tea in styrofoam cups. Julia takes a lukewarm sip, grimaces, and Rafael sees her. Almost laughs silently, but hides it. He moves a bit closer, not close enough to look too interested, but not indifferent either. He stands beside her now, wordless. Together, they watch a mother settle her boy in the pediatric bed, combing his hair so tenderly it almost hurts to watch. Julia wants to say something light, but lets it go. He thinks he could ask if she's all right, but doesn't know how. Between them there is only the smallest gap, but it feels enormous. And even so, they share something out of sight. Around 3, a new case arrives. Nothing major, just the usual forms, tests, conversation. Julia moves quickly, smoothly. Rafael watches, impressed by her efficiency, and for a split second, forgets to keep his guard up. As they swap paperwork in the narrow hall, Julia's hand brushes his arm. It lasts no time at all, but both feel it. She recoils quickly, cheeks burning, hoping she's not blushing too badly. Rafael, inside, feels something new. The smallest jolt. Is it an awakening? He doesn't know. On her break, Julia finally lets exhaustion take over and lays her head on her arms, on the medication table. Rafael shows up later, quiet. On the other side, he reaches for a piece of paper to write dosages, but stops mid-scribble. Looks at Julia again. Every tired line on her face looks like a story he wishes he knew. Inside, Rafael remembers, against his will, days when he let himself be cared for, unafraid. That was another Rafael, before everything went wrong. He catches himself wishing he could sit beside her and just be there, still, seen. But he doesn't, not now. The clock lurches on. The night feels endless. The whole place smells of alcohol and burnt coffee. A fine rain taps the tin roof outside. The wind sneaks in under the door. Cold, sharp, just like what Rafael carries inside. Julia gets up, twists her hair into a messy bun, straightens her wrinkled top. Rafael watches, trying not to let it show. She notices his glance lingering longer, and feels somewhere deep in her chest that something's shifting, even if he tries to pretend it isn't. They cross paths again, deeper into the night. Bump shoulders in the narrow hall, exchange a soft good night, each pretending not to care. But the silence after has a strange warmth, almost comforting. And in those moments when the monitor's beeps fill the emptiness, both of them know that, in some odd way, they're less alone. Admitting it now, though, would be like jumping into cold water without knowing how to swim. So they stick to their routines, protect themselves where they can, but they're not as scared of the silence anymore. Because, in every exchanged look, every accidental brush, something started to shift in that night that felt like it would never end. I can't remember the hour. Inside, time and exhaustion blur together, no morning or night, just the stagnant hospital air. The hallway lights were mostly off. Only a dying bulb left its glow over the little office, where Julia absently searched for last shift's paperwork. But the quiet scrape of a chair caught her attention. It wasn't normal for anyone to hang back after the handover. People wanted to run home, shower, try to sleep. But Rafael? No. He always lingered a bit. But right now, there was something different about him. A hush, as if he'd pulled himself in tight. Julia stopped in the doorway, unnoticed. He sat alone, his white coat rumpled, for him, a rare thing, staring at his phone. But it wasn't the tense face he always wore, not that upright, soldier-straight pose. He was slumped, shoulders heavy, breathing deep like he was fighting something inside. And on the phone, she saw an old photo. The glow of the screen showed a woman's face beside him. A woman smiling, hair loose, almost wrapped around him. And the smile Rafael had in that picture was entirely different, the smile of someone who had once been truly happy. She stood there, paused just for a moment. She felt a strange tightness, a mix of compassion and curiosity, a desire to get closer, to understand what kind of pain was that, the one that never appeared when he gave orders, but that seemed to pour out, completely, into the empty spaces on the shift. She walked over slowly, trying not to startle him. She rehearsed a quiet, hi, but Rafael sensed her presence before she spoke. He tensed up again for a millisecond. He put his phone away, staring hard at the table as if he wished he could disappear. For some reason, Julia didn't walk away. She wanted to say something, anything simple. She couldn't pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen. She felt that urge to let him know she was there, just in case he needed someone. Silent support, no strings attached. He took a deep breath, exhausted, and let out one of those sighs that don't make anything better. His face turned cold again, nearly shut down. Please, leave me alone, he said quietly, without looking at her. There was no anger, just the sad firmness of someone who's already learned to push people away when they risk getting too close. She hesitated, awkwardly, and looked at him, trying to decipher if it was hurt, shame, or just fear of company at that moment. She wanted to touch his shoulder, any small gesture. But the distance between them had grown huge, like an invisible wall between two strangers. All she could do was respect his wish. She didn't push. But she stood there for a few seconds anyway, staring at the floor, biting her lip like she always did when she was nervous and unsure what to do next. The silence between them was thick, full of unasked questions, and Julia wanted to run, but her feet didn't obey right away. Deep down, she knew this kind of hurt was worse than any physical wound. Rafael's loneliness was old. It wasn't a mood, It was a defense. That photo, that woman. It was as if everything inside him had been ripped out, and what was left locked itself behind 1,000 locks. Julia had never seen so much sadness contained in so few words. The air in the room felt cold, unlike the muggy heat outside after the rain. A leaky roof dripped in the corner, tick, tack, tick, marking the silence in a nearly cruel way. Rafael ran his hand slowly through his long hair, as if that could sweep away a dark thought, or maybe bring back the days when he could smile like in that photo. She wished she could say 1,000 things in that moment. That he didn't have to go through everything alone. That no one is made of steel. That everyone has some broken piece hidden inside. She knew, because she had hers too. But you can't compete with someone else's ghosts. Trying to talk about pain with someone who only accepts their own silence is like trying to glue a glass face back together in the dark. Maybe you just didn't want to be seen as weak. At the neighboring town's pharmacy, with the generator flickering, I explained everything in a single breath. The pharmacist looked at me as though he sensed the urgency before I finished. By some luck, or a miracle reserved for the impossible, he had exactly 1 box left. Back in the car, hands shaking, medicine cradled like a jewel. Only when the engine failed before catching did the exhaustion hit. I cried right there, alone. From fear of losing, from not knowing if I could get back in time, from allowing myself to feel for someone when I'd sworn never to love again. I cried from cold, exhaustion, all that hidden love. The car started. I drove faster than I should. When I saw the hospital lights, I could hardly believe I'd made it. Glasses fogged, face streaked with tears and rain. Rafael was waiting, half-conscious, sometimes mumbling, but breathing more steady than before. As soon as I entered, I went straight to him, hand trembling with the medicine. The others moved quickly. But the moment belonged to just us two, despite all the commotion. I leaned close to his face, touched my fingers lightly to his sweaty forehead, like saying a prayer without faith, but full of hope. Whispered, "I'm back. You won't fight alone anymore." He didn't open his eyes right away, but his eyelids quivered, and he sighed deeply. Now, the fight was not only mine. I felt Rafael understood. He wanted to live. Wanted, somehow, to exist with me now, where before there'd just been that proud stone wall. There, in between sobs, harsh light, and rain still hammering the windows, I realized that sacrifice is just another name for hope. And anyone who's waited for has never truly walked alone through a storm, even when everything was nearly lost. The smell of strong alcohol burned in the room. Light from the hallway crept through a crack in the door, tracing a golden line on the floor and casting shadows across Rafael's face stretched out on the hospital bed. It was the dead of night. The storm had passed, but left everything quieter, more fragile. The wall clock made a muffled tick-tock. I could hear even that, so alert to the sound of someone else breathing, dozing in an old chair beside him. The drip trickled slow and steady. The world felt suspended in that tiny room, in that slow waiting. Rafael opened his eyes in the dark, and for a second, said nothing. That was his way. I got used to it. I knew his silence was never empty, just weighed down with fear, with words that needed courage to be spoken. My eyes met his, and, for the first time since that wild night in the rain, I saw the wall crumble. In the doctor's eyes, there was tiredness, but also a strange relief. Something loosened, surrendered. He tried to smile, but hadn't the strength. So he just closed his eyes again, as if taking a breath before the plunge. "You should rest," I whispered softly. I knew he hated to appear vulnerable. Pause. The drip, the world outside, patients coughing, a nurse snoring against the wall. Rafael looked at the ceiling, moved his hand on the blanket, fumbling like he needed to hold something nameless. I almost died. Again. It was true. His weakness wasn't just in his body. You could see it behind the front, behind the precise touch of a doctor used to death. Inside him, death was a wound that never closed. I bit my lip, stopped myself from coming closer, from pulling all his pain into a hug. Wasn't time yet. Sometimes he needed to speak at his own pace. I kept quiet, giving him space, but always stayed close enough so he'd know he could fall. He stammered, voice rough, and dropped his gaze, ashamed of his own frailty. I spent years thinking it was dangerous to feel anything at all. To lose again. I never wanted that. So I got cold. Better to control everything, feel nothing. I knew all I wanted was to open up that closed heart, but I honored his space. The silence was heavy, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a promise or an invitation. Speak. I'm here. Rafael laughed without joy, a sound halfway between a chuckle and a sob. "You know I lost my wife. Everyone here knew, 5 years ago. I thought I'd never again, that I didn't deserve to. That was it. I didn't deserve to try, didn't deserve affection, didn't deserve to be happy. That little room turned into a makeshift confessional, the air tinged with barely contained tears. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry, not in front of him. Instead, I quietly placed my hand over his, gentle and respectful. The touch was small, almost timid, but in that second it was worth more than any words. Rafael squeezed my hand, slow and careful. Only in his weakness did he allow himself to be seen fully, with every cut life had left open. I didn't pry for more. I didn't need to know every detail of his past. What hurt me was seeing the burden he carried, and knowing he didn't have to do it alone. I'm not easy, Julia. I'm scared. Still. Of trusting, of getting hurt, of hurting someone again. I always thought I had to be strong by myself. That love was weakness. His voice came out faint, barely a whisper, like the walls could judge him too. I drew a deep breath, pulled the chair closer, still holding his hand. Looked him square in the eye, unhurried, like someone who's ready to hear the worst and the best. Everybody's got scars, Rafael. No one gets out unscathed. But you know, I leaned in, my face just inches from his, tears visible only in the shine in my eyes. My own pain felt smaller after you arrived. I don't want perfect. I want you. Hurt. Afraid. Exactly as you are. He looked away, as if not knowing how to receive such care, such faith. The tips of my fingers traced his hand softly, a tender gesture saying, I'm here, even on the hard days. Outside, the wind still howled, dragging paper down empty streets. The whole clinic seemed to be sleeping, breathing soft after the chaos of the days before. I realized I was hungry and tired, but couldn't leave him for even a moment. After a long pause, Rafael breathed deep. His eyes found mine again, and this time held steady. You don't know what it's like to wake up every day feeling guilty, wondering if you could have done something different, if you could have saved the person you love. I closed myself off because it hurts less. Only, the pain just got worse. It never went away. His honesty hurt, but it was healing too. Little by little, like reversed anesthesia, Rafael felt his heart come back. It hurt like hell, but the emptiness was finally smaller than the desire to try again. I smiled that serene way of mine. I'm scared too. Of losing again, of not being enough. But if there's one thing I've learned in this tough job, it's this. Pain isn't something you get through by yourself. You cross it with someone by your side. Silence, again. But this time, it was peaceful. It was a truce. I pulled him close, and Rafael, stiff at first, let himself be held. Bit by bit, his arms went around my waist, and there, for the first time, he let go. He whispered, almost sighing, "Thank you, for not giving up on me." I smiled. The scent of warm skin, the tight hug, hearts still a bit off rhythm, but beating together. I realized his scars, so unlike my own, could be entwined with mine. And in that dawn's quiet, it was clear, it wasn't about healing the past anymore. It was about inventing a future, one step at a time, even if fear still lived in the spaces between us. There, among confessions and the gentle sound of his slowing breath, we understood, together, we could be stronger. Together, we could, finally, begin to heal. You know that heavy silence that fills every corner of a room, even when people are murmuring outside? That's how it was in the director's office that morning. Outside, the sky showed that dull gray that comes before a storm, thunder looming in the background, almost fitting the storm brewing inside me. Rafael sat tense. His fingers tapped quietly on his leg, as if trying to hide his nerves, but I could tell. I'd always noticed that cold layer he wore, like armor, but now, you could see the cracks. The hospital board didn't care about making things easy. Sharp words, judging eyes piling on what he'd been, never what he'd tried to be since the day he'd arrived. Mrs. Marta, the director, was blunt. "We can't turn a blind eye to your past, doctor. It's a matter of trust. This town depends on us." It was unfair. She spoke as though Rafael was nothing more than that. Just a headline mistake from years ago, never the exhausted, sweat-soaked man sitting up all night holding the hand of a patient everyone else had given up on. I looked at him. You can tell when someone freezes up inside. Rafael sat motionless, pressed back against his chair. His jaw tight, eyes cast down. You could almost hear his thoughts pounding against his skull. The kind that say, "Makes sense. They're right. I don't deserve to be here." Suddenly, I spoke before I even realized it. No fancy speech, just me, Julia, as I've always been, never knowing when to stay quiet. "Look, maybe what you're saying matters legally, but I see people for who they are today. for the choices they make every single day. And he chose to stay. He chose to fight here with us. How many of you have stayed up until 3 in the morning, changing dressings, stitching up axe wounds with no anesthesia? Who here has watched a child smile again because someone, even exhausted, stayed by their side, holding their hand? No one answered. The room hung in that nearly silent pause. All you could hear was Rafael, holding his breath. I went on, my palms slick with sweat, but I didn't have the courage to stop. Everybody carries hurt, some loss, some scar. I saw Rafael arrive here as someone who expected nothing. But he stayed. He bled with us. He made mistakes and apologized 100 times. He showed that medicine for him isn't just a diploma. It's medicine for his own pain, too. The director looked at me with that mix of surprise and discomfort. You know that feeling, like you've just stripped the mask off everyone in the room? The rest of the staff had gathered in the doorway, half by accident, half on purpose. Gossip spreads fast in a small town, but nobody came to snoop. They came because everyone knows that in a place where there's never enough tape and always too much desperation, survival only happens together. So I turned toward the door. My voice came out louder, my throat tight without realizing it. If anyone here has ever been helped by Dr. Rafael, you should speak up. Because what he did or didn't do years ago isn't what he's done here, every day. And that knocked down the last wall. A patient showed up first. Dona Selena, the one with the chronic illness, her voice trembling. He sat with me for 2 hours when I thought I was going to die. Her husband followed, his voice stronger. My little boy was saved by him and Julia. I saw it. And, one by one, they came. Nurses, techs, janitors, mothers, old ladies. They talked about Rafael on cold mornings, the dark circles under eyes that hadn't slept but never gave up, his rough way that still never turned down a favor. Ordinary people talking about what they'd seen, not what they'd read in a report or newspaper. At that moment, I could feel something rebuilding inside him. I'll never forget the way Rafael slowly lifted his head. There was still shame, a hint of guilt, but something warmer there too, a kind of hope he'd never let anyone see. Maybe not even himself. The director, towering in her authority, listened to it all, unable to interrupt. And when the room finally quieted, she took a deep breath and pronounced, rather reluctantly, "We'll reconsider. What matters here is the will to change. And dedication to the patients." When everyone left, Rafael just stood there. The health post corridor echoed voices, hurried footsteps, the scent of burnt coffee. He seemed smaller, just for a second. His perfect doctor mask, the one nobody touched, slipped a little. He looked at me like he wanted to say sorry or thank you, but couldn't find the words. Between us, only the sound of rain finally pounding down, heavy, washing the window, washing away weeks of exhaustion too. I wanted to take his hand, but I hesitated. In the end, I stepped forward quickly and touched his arm. His skin was cold, but his muscle was warm and alive, pulsing under my fingers. He didn't pull away. He looked at me, really looked, for the first time. Not with that defensive arrogance or fear of failing, but with gratitude. I saw in his eyes the weight of 5 years carrying pain alone, and for the first time, relief, even if only for a second. That's how love arrives, part shock, part decision. We didn't say anything. The sound of rain was our shelter. I thought, it's okay. You can breathe. He just closed his eyes for a moment, as if storing away the feeling, before whispering, so softly it was almost just for me, "Thank you, Julia." And I knew it wasn't simple. It was a whole life spent trying to stay protected, and now letting someone else fight for him. For a moment, the town disappeared. No memories, no future. Just that narrow hallway, the scent of hospital mixed with damp earth. Just our scars. If love isn't fighting every day, then I don't know what is. In that instant, loving was forgiving. And, maybe, starting again. The city starts waking up slowly, but inside my house, there's only silence, the good kind, no hurry, no heaviness. The light of a new day slips through the thin curtains, dragging a timid golden glow across the worn-out floor. I see Rafael sitting at the table, coffee cup in his hands. There's always been something about his face I couldn't decipher. Today, it's as if the usual shadows are missing. There's the smell of fresh bread coming from the kitchen, and I keep thinking about how little things change when the pain begins to heal. We don't say anything. Not because there's nothing, but because the silence isn't hurting anymore. It just rests between us. I move closer, sit next to him, our shoulders gently touching. He smiles, a little crooked, almost shy, and I realize I'm starting to meet a whole other person behind the doctor's armor. "Ready?" he asks quietly, his voice raspy. like someone who's finally dreamed well for the first time in ages. I just nod. No rush, take his hand. He looks at me in happy surprise, as if he's still getting used to having me beside him. His touch is peaceful, truly warm. And suddenly, those hands that have saved so many seem to need shelter too. The street is washed clean after last night's rain. Leaves stick to the ground, that smell of wet earth and the promise of starting over hanging in the air. The town is tiny, but people passing by notice us, some wave, some smile. I think it's the first time walking to the clinic doesn't feel like a chore. There's something different in Rafael's step. He moves slow, no longer pulling that Sao Paulo hurry behind him, not trying to hide behind his white coat. The iron gate creaks just like always, but today, I don't hear it as a complaint. It's just another sound of daily life falling back into place. The outbreak has passed, but it's left its marks. Some people still carry fear tucked behind their smiles, but routine is pulling everyone back toward life, even if everyone limps a little. I feel Rafael squeeze my hand tighter. He pauses before going in, takes a deep breath. His eyes look for mine, but not for reassurance, just for the sake of sharing. It amazes me how much a look can say. There's gratitude. A little fear, too, but it's not the fear of losing anymore. It's the fear of losing what he's just found. I've decided to stay, Julia. He says it so simply that I'm not even sure I understood at first. A shy burst of joy fills my chest. I look at him, unable to hold back my smile. He goes on. I can't imagine leaving here anymore. Not leaving you, the people, all of this. I always thought my life was just that cold routine full of protocols, of distance. But here, everything makes sense in a different way. I see it in his eyes, the battle between the man he's always been, closed off, rigid, and the one he's letting himself become now. It wasn't quick. It wasn't easy. And still, he stayed. Inside the clinic, the hallways smell like alcohol and lavender. Everyone's back at work, piecing together what the outbreak broke apart. There are careful hugs, news about patients who recovered and those who will need more time. I know that way of getting on with life. This whole town has survived so much, together. Rafael walks up to the bulletin board. He always used to stop there to point out what was missing, to give clipped orders. Today he just stands, quietly. When he notices the handwritten sign, "Welcome back, Dr. Rafael," he smiles for real. Not that polite smile. A smile blended with embarrassment and joy, because he's never seen himself worthy of that kind of affection. I watch him talking to Donatida, the nursing assistant with the easy laugh, about planting new trees in the clinic's yard. I hear him promising to teach the school kids about hygiene, and I realize he's becoming slowly a part of things he never thought he'd want to feel. There's a new calm between us. It's not a dream, not perfect. Challenges still come. Medicine runs out. Patients miss appointments. Phones never stop ringing. Pain always finds its way back. But none of it feels impossible anymore. What once felt hopeless just requires patience, partnership, and more than anything, faith in tomorrow. Sometimes Rafa rests his forehead against mine, like he's telling me, without needing words, I'm here. I'm not running away. His past still hurts, I know. Now and then I see that lost look, a bittersweet longing. But he shared his memories with me, and now it feels like love can live alongside longing, without either one swallowing the other. Sunset sneaks up on us. The clinic's walls glow gold, white coats lit up in such a beautiful way. I wipe my hands on my apron and see Rafael, away from the rush, looking at me from down the hall. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to. Just a few steps, a soft smile, and the way his hand finds mine, without fear, without hurry. Maybe this is that kind of love they say can heal. Not one that erases pain, but one that changes its meaning. The kind that turns scars into a path forward. That joins together two patched-up destinies and lets hope blow between them. When I look at him, I know there's no going back. Not that I'd want to. The future is still uncertain, but we move forward together, through doubt, through triumphs, through silence. Deep down I know, in the simplest way, that the best remedy has always been here, in hands that find each other without demanding promises, in gentle eyes that learn how to begin again. That's it, now. A new dawn for the two of us.